Girlfriend wanted a break, doubting my fidelity. 5 weeks later, she turned up pregnant. So yeah, I thought I had it all figured out. My girlfriend and I had been together for 2 years and things were going great. We'd met in college, both working hard to get our degrees, both ready to make something out of our lives. I was just wrapping up grad school, and we'd been planning for what was next, you know? Moving in together, setting up a nice life. Hell, I even had a plan to propose to her by next year. I hadn't told her that yet, but it was on my mind all the time. We'd talked about our future so much, it was like I could already see it playing out, day by day. We'd joke around about what we'd name our kids. She loved the name Ella for a girl, and I thought Jackson sounded cool for a boy. We'd get all carried away picturing life 10, 20 years from now, with a dog, a couple of kids, and some little house somewhere. And I really thought we were both on the same page with all of it. It felt like this was the person I was meant to be with, no question. And yeah, maybe I was a bit blind about it. You see, I work in nursing and I'm around a lot of women. That's just how it is in this field. My best friend from nursing school is a woman, and my best man for my future wedding was actually going to be her. I get that some people might see that as a problem. So I made it clear to my girlfriend early on that these friendships were just friendships, nothing more. I didn't want there to be any jealousy or weirdness hanging over us. And for a long time, she seemed cool with it. Or at least I thought she was. Now looking back, maybe there were signs I missed. But at the time, it seemed like everything was smooth. We'd talk about anything and everything. But around New Year's, she got a bit weird. We were at a friend's party, and she'd had a few drinks. Out of nowhere, she brought up that she didn't really like two of my friends in particular. Now I wasn't expecting that at all. She'd always been fine with my friends before, so hearing her say she had a problem with these two kind of threw me. I asked her why, and she just mumbled something about feeling like I might have had a thing with them before we started dating. It's wild to me because I never gave her any reason to think that. I tried to reassure her right there at the party, but she just kept giving me this look like she didn't believe me. It felt strange and honestly a bit insulting. Like here I was, pouring my heart out to her, making all these plans for our future, and she was suddenly convinced I was lying about my friends? The next day, when we were both sober, I brought it up again. I wanted to know where this was coming from because I'd never been anything but honest with her. I mean, these two friends she suddenly didn't trust were people I'd known for years. One of them, let's call her friend A, was the first real friend I'd made when I moved away from home for nursing school. She was like family to me, helped me get through some tough times when I was still getting used to being away from my hometown. The other, friend B, was someone I met during my first job in the ER. We were on night shifts together, bonding over exhaustion and crazy patient stories. They were both important parts of my life, but strictly in a friend way, nothing else. She sat there, listening, nodding, and eventually told me that she understood. She even apologized for overreacting. I thought that was it, honestly. Like, okay, we had a little blip, and now we were back on track. But something in her had shifted, and I didn't see it at the time. Over the next couple of months, things felt off, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. She'd still laugh at my dumb jokes and cuddle up to me on the couch, but I could feel this weird tension building. She wasn't as open as she used to be, and whenever I'd bring up future plans, she'd just nod along without the same excitement she used to have. I tried not to dwell on it. I figured maybe she was just stressed from work or something, but then I found out she'd been talking to a friend from high school, someone she'd known forever, who barely knew me at all. Apparently, they'd had a few conversations about me and these two friends she was suspicious of. Somehow, this friend of hers convinced her that I was lying. The whole thing sounds so dumb now, but at the time, it really hurt. Here was someone I loved, someone I was planning a future with, letting some random friend plant all these doubts in her head. It all came to a head one night when she flat out told me she didn't trust me. That was the first time I'd ever heard her say that, and it honestly floored me. I was mad, but more than anything, I felt betrayed. I'd done everything to make sure she felt secure in our relationship, made my boundaries with my friends clear, and here she was accusing me of what exactly? I didn't even know. I asked her if there was anything I could do to make her feel better, but she just shrugged it off, said she didn't know if she could ever fully trust me. So after a lot of back and forth, we ended up deciding to take a break. I didn't even know if I really wanted that, but it felt like the only way to get some space and let things cool down. I still thought we'd work it out, like a temporary pause just to clear our heads. In my mind, we were just hitting pause on our story, and in a few weeks we'd be back together and stronger for it. I really believed that. Looking back, I can't help but wonder how much I missed, how much of what she was feeling just went unspoken until it all came crashing down. It's like one minute we're planning our lives together, And the next, I'm left wondering if any of it was real. If all those talks about the future were just dreams I made up in my head. So, yeah, I thought I had it all planned out. But maybe I was just fooling myself. After we agreed to take a break, I felt this weird combination of hope and dread. Like, I was convinced this was just a phase, a little reset button we needed to hit. We'd been together for 2 years, and this was just a blip, right? She had her doubts, sure, but I thought once she got some space, she'd realize I was being genuine, that there was nothing going on with my friends. It felt stupid, though, because as much as I tried to convince myself everything would be fine, there was this gut feeling I couldn't shake. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I was giving her the space she'd asked for, but that didn't mean it was easy. Every day, I'd get this urge to text her, call her, just ask her how she was doing, but I held back. I figured that was what she wanted. It was rough, though. You spend 2 years with someone, and then suddenly, you're not supposed to talk to them? It messed with my head. I'd wake up every morning half expecting a message from her, some sign that she was ready to work things out. But there was nothing. Just silence. A couple of weeks into the break, I tried to distract myself. I buried myself in my work, cramming for exams, spending extra hours studying, even though my brain was already fried. Friends noticed I was off, but I didn't want to get into it with anyone. I'd just tell them I was fine and move on. The truth was I was anything but fine. I was on edge constantly, wondering if she was thinking about me the way I was thinking about her. About a month into this whole break thing, I was finally starting to accept the silence. I thought maybe this was just going to be a long break, that she'd come back when she was ready. It sucked, but I'd kind of settled into this waiting game, just hoping she'd text me, ask to meet up, something. Then, one random Tuesday, she reached out. She said she wanted to talk in person, which sounded promising. I remember feeling like I was about to get some sort of closure, maybe even an apology for doubting me. I kept thinking she'd say she missed me, that the break helped her realize I was being honest all along. I went over a million scenarios in my head, every single one ending with us getting back together. When I saw her, though, something in her eyes it didn't look right. She looked guilty, almost like she couldn't meet my gaze for more than a second. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she just felt bad about the way things had gone down. I asked her how she'd been, trying to keep it light, but she cut straight to the point. She told me she'd made a mistake. That's exactly how she put it. I made a mistake. And before I could even process what she was saying, she drops the real news. She'd hooked up with a coworker. Twice. Apparently it happened right after we agreed to take the break. She kept saying it was a mistake, that she was confused and angry and hurt. But none of that mattered to me at that moment. I could barely breathe. I remember just staring at her, trying to wrap my head around it. This was the person I'd planned my future with, the person I trusted more than anyone. And she'd gone and done the exact thing she accused me of. The irony would be funny if it didn't hurt so much. She tried to justify it, saying that she was feeling insecure and thought I was hiding things from her. It was like she was trying to twist it into some messed up form of self-defense, like she wouldn't have done it if I hadn't had close friends who happened to be women. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those conversations we'd had, the promises, the future we dreamed up together, it felt like it all vanished in an instant. I asked her if she loved him. I don't know why I asked that, but it just came out. She looked at me wide-eyed, like she hadn't expected me to say that. She said no, it was just a mistake, just something that happened because she was lonely and confused. She kept saying it was meaningless, that she didn't want to be with him. But in my head, it didn't matter. She'd done it. She'd crossed a line that, in my mind, you just don't come back from. She went on about how she regretted it, how she'd been talking to her high school friend, and that friend had basically convinced her that I was lying to her, manipulating her or something. I just sat there, letting her words wash over me, not even really listening after a while. It was like I was in a daze, numb to everything. I felt like a stranger sitting across from her, like the person I thought I knew was gone. I asked her why she'd even bothered telling me, why she didn't just let the break be the end of things if this was how she felt. She said she felt guilty, that she couldn't live with herself knowing she'd lied to me. Funny because she hadn't had a problem believing I was lying this whole time, but now her conscience suddenly woke up. We sat in silence for a bit. I think she was expecting me to blow up, yell, do something dramatic. But I didn't have it in me. I was too drained, too hurt to even respond properly. I just told her I needed time to process it, that I couldn't give her an answer right then. She tried to apologize again, reaching across the table to touch my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't even look at her anymore. I just got up and walked out, leaving her sitting there alone. I don't remember much about that drive home. It felt like everything I'd built in my head, our plans, our future, had just been yanked away. I kept thinking about those 2 years we'd spent together, all the little things we shared, and how easily she threw it away. For what? A couple of nights with some random guy from work? When I got home, I just sat in the dark for hours, replaying everything in my mind, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I kept wondering if I could have done something different, if there was some way I could have prevented this. But deep down, I knew the truth. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. After that, I didn't reach out. She sent a couple of texts saying she was sorry, that she wanted to talk things through, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. It was like every message just reopened the wound, made it hurt all over again. I didn't want her apologies. I wanted back the person I thought I knew, the future I'd thought we'd have. And now I wasn't sure if either of those things had ever been real. After that talk, I thought I'd feel something. Closure, anger, whatever. But it was more like this numbness just settled over me. My brain wouldn't process it fully, almost like it was in shock. I went through the motions every day, but I felt detached from everything. It was like my body was moving and going to work, and doing what it needed to, but my mind was stuck somewhere else, looping through every single thing she'd told me. I kept replaying that conversation in my head, trying to pick apart every word, wondering if there was something I missed. Like, was there a moment when she showed some real remorse? Was there some hidden meaning behind what she said that I could cling to? But there was nothing. Every time I went over it, it felt emptier, like she'd given me this hollowed-out version of an apology. My friends noticed something was up, obviously. They could tell I was zoning out, that I wasn't myself. But I wasn't ready to talk to anyone about it yet. I mean, how do you even start that conversation? Hey, yeah, my girlfriend cheated on me with her coworker during our break because she thought I was lying about my friends. Just saying it out loud would make it feel even more real. So I just kept it all bottled up, told everyone I was fine, and hoped they'd leave it alone. Nights were the worst. I'd lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, and my brain wouldn't shut up. All these thoughts just circling around, mostly questions that I'd never get answers to. Like, did she ever really trust me? Was she always waiting for a chance to cheat? Or did I somehow push her into this without realizing it? I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I'd done something wrong, even though I knew deep down that this wasn't on me. I thought about texting her so many times, even though I knew that was a terrible idea. I'd pick up my phone, stare at her name, type out some half-hearted message, and then delete it. I wanted answers, but at the same time, I didn't want to open myself up to more hurt. Every time I thought about asking her anything, I imagined her with that guy, and it just twisted the knife all over again. Eventually, the lack of sleep started catching up with me. I was exhausted, barely keeping it together at work. I'd show up, try to focus, but half the time I was just running on autopilot. I'd catch myself staring off into space, getting lost in my thoughts, and then snap back to reality when someone asked me a question or needed help with something. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know what else to do. It felt like I was trapped in this fog of emotions, with no way to see my way out. One day, I tried going for a run, hoping it'd help clear my mind. I used to run a lot, especially when things got stressful in school, so I thought maybe it'd work again. But halfway through, I just stopped in the middle of the track, completely out of breath and feeling like I'd made everything worse. My chest was tight, my hands were shaking, and for a second I thought I was going to pass out. I sat down on the grass, just trying to breathe, but every time I closed my eyes, it was like she was there. I could see her face, hear her voice telling me how sorry she was, and it just crushed me. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I got up and walked back home. That's when I knew I needed some kind of distraction, something to keep my mind busy. So I buried myself in work even harder. I started picking up extra shifts, staying late, doing whatever I could to avoid going back to that empty apartment. I'd volunteer for things I'd usually avoid, like organizing files just so I didn't have to think about anything else. It helped a little, I guess, but the second I was alone again, it all came flooding back. Then the panic attacks started. They'd hit me out of nowhere, like first thing in the morning or late at night. I'd wake up feeling like I couldn't breathe, my heart racing, my hands sweating. I'd have to sit on the edge of my bed, take deep breaths, just trying to get a grip. The worst part was that it felt like it wasn't even my life anymore. I was this shell of a person, just trying to get through the day without falling apart. The people around me kept asking if I was okay. My friends would check in, ask if I wanted to hang out or go to a movie, but I'd always say no. I couldn't bring myself to be around anyone, let alone pretend like everything was fine. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess, so I just shut myself off, hoping the numbness would eventually fade. But instead of fading, it started turning into this deep, aching sadness. I'd think about our memories together, the trips we took, the nights we spent laughing, all those late-night talks about our future, and it felt like each memory was tainted now. It was like I couldn't even look back on the good times without feeling that sharp sting of betrayal. One night, after another sleepless stretch, I found myself looking through our old photos. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to remember what things were like before all this happened. But it backfired. Seeing her smiling, all those moments where I thought we were happy, just reminded me of everything I'd lost. I ended up deleting most of them, like that would somehow help me forget. But it didn't. I couldn't get rid of the memories that easily. At this point, I knew I needed to do something, anything, to break this cycle. But I didn't know where to start. Therapy crossed my mind, but I was hesitant. It felt like admitting defeat, like saying I couldn't handle this on my own. But as each day passed, I was starting to realize that maybe I couldn't handle it. Not without some kind of support, at least. The worst part was the loneliness. Not just being alone, but feeling like nobody really understood what I was going through. I'd see other couples around me, people laughing and holding hands, and it was like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd been that guy just a few months ago, the one with his whole future planned out. And now I was this mess of a person who didn't even know how to get through the next hour, let alone the next week. Looking back, it feels like she took more than just our relationship when she cheated. She took my peace of mind, my ability to trust, maybe even my sense of who I was. And trying to rebuild all that alone was harder than I'd ever imagined. Every day felt like a battle, just trying to stay afloat in this sea of anger and sadness. But I kept going, because what else was there to do? I couldn't let her destroy me completely. So that was my life, surviving one day at a time, hoping that eventually the pain would start to fade. I hit rock bottom pretty soon after that. The endless nights of barely sleeping, feeling like a stranger in my own life, the panic attacks, it was all piling up, like I was carrying around a weight I couldn't shake off. I knew I needed a way out of this, but every step forward felt impossible, like I was stuck in quicksand. There were days I'd get up, stare at myself in the mirror, and barely recognize the person looking back. I looked drained, worn out. It was like I was watching myself fall apart in slow motion. One of the worst moments came when I got news that a friend's mom had passed away. She'd been kind to me growing up, and I couldn't not go to the funeral, so I got dressed up, drove to the funeral home, and braced myself to see a bunch of people from back home. At first, I thought I was handling it okay, standing in line, making small talk with people I hadn't seen in years. But then I stepped inside, saw her family, saw the casket, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Out of nowhere, I started feeling dizzy. My vision went blurry, my chest got tight, and I knew I was about to have another one of those panic attacks. Right there, in front of everyone. I don't know how I got through it, but somehow, I made it through the showing and drove back to my parents' house. By the time I walked in the door, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. My mom was in the kitchen cooking, and I remember just collapsing on the couch while my dad tried to make small talk with me. 1 minute we're chatting, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up in the back of an ambulance. Apparently, I'd had some kind of seizure. My dad said I was just sitting there, laughing at something, and then started shaking. At first, he thought I was joking around, but when I didn't stop, he panicked. I woke up confused, strapped to a stretcher, with some paramedic asking me if I knew what day it was. It was terrifying. The whole ride to the hospital, all I could think was, how did I get to this point? How did my life end up like this? The doctors ran a bunch of tests, and everything came back normal. I sat there in that cold hospital room, numb, as a neurologist explained to me that I was likely dealing with PTSD symptoms from the breakup and everything that happened. She said the constant anxiety and lack of sleep had probably triggered the seizure. It was weirdly reassuring to hear that, like, okay, this is what's going on with me. But it also hit me that I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. When I finally got home, I knew I had to make some changes. I was done letting her take up space in my head. I deleted her number, unfollowed her on every app, and even threw out anything that reminded me of her. It felt weirdly good, like cleaning out a room I hadn't set foot in for ages. But I still had to deal with the rest of my life. All those feelings I'd been trying to bury, all the memories that wouldn't leave me alone. So I decided to open up finally. I called up a couple of close friends and told them everything. Talking about it made me realize how much I'd kept bottled up. One of my friends, Dave, just listened the whole time, nodding, not judging. At the end of it, he told me something that hit hard. He said that letting her control my life, even from a distance, was only giving her more power. He was right. I was letting this person, who'd clearly moved on, take over my life while I was stuck, miserable. It was like I'd put myself in a prison and tossed the key. That conversation was the first real step toward letting go. The next few weeks were still hard, but I forced myself to stick to a routine. I'd get up, go for a run, even if I didn't feel like it, then head to work, focus on my patients, and come home exhausted. I knew I couldn't just shut myself off forever, so I started reconnecting with people I'd avoided, saying yes to grabbing coffee or going for a walk. Each day felt a tiny bit lighter, like I was slowly clawing my way out of that dark place. Then one night, something just clicked. I was out for a run, listening to music, letting my thoughts drift, and I realized I hadn't thought about her once the entire day. It sounds small, but it was huge for me. It felt like proof that I could move on, that I didn't have to stay trapped in this endless loop of hurt and regret. I could finally see a way out, even if it was just a glimmer at that point. After that, I started setting small goals for myself, things that would give me something to look forward to, stuff I'd always wanted to do but never got around to. I signed up for a local 5K, started reading again, even looked into taking a short trip by myself. It was like I was rediscovering who I was without her, figuring out what I liked and what made me happy, independent of anyone else. One night I dug out an old notebook and started writing down everything I felt. It was like purging all the junk from my head onto paper. I wrote about the anger, the betrayal, the nights I couldn't sleep, the times I almost reached out to her but didn't. I just let it all pour out, raw and unfiltered. And after pages and pages of scribbling, I felt lighter, like I'd let go of some invisible weight. Eventually, I found myself smiling again, genuinely. I'd hang out with friends, crack jokes, and actually enjoy myself without feeling like I was putting on an act. It felt good to laugh, to be present in the moment, and not have her ghost hanging over everything. Little by little, I was reclaiming parts of my life that I thought were lost forever. I won't lie, there are still days where memories creep back in, where I feel a twinge of what could have been, but they don't control me anymore. I know now that I'm stronger than I thought, that I'm capable of moving forward even when it feels impossible. I'm starting to see myself in a new light, as someone who's been through hell, but didn't let it break him. At the end of it all, I don't even hate her anymore. If anything, I feel sorry for her. She's the one who couldn't see what we had, who chose to throw it away. And maybe that's the biggest realization I've had through all this. I deserve better. I deserve someone who's in it for the long haul, who sees my worth and doesn't let doubt cloud their view. And yeah, I still have work to do. I'm not fully healed, not by a long shot. But I'm on my way there, one day at a time. For the first time in months, I can honestly say I'm okay with being on my own. And that's a feeling I wouldn't trade for anything. Update. Just when I thought I was finally moving on, she showed up. Out of the blue, there she was, standing at my door with a baby in her arms. My mind blanked for a second. I mean, it had been months since we'd spoken, and even longer since I'd really thought about her beyond the occasional memory that popped up. I'd finally been at peace. I'd done the work, let go of the anger, focused on myself, all of it. And now here she was, holding the one reminder I'd been trying so hard to move past. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at me with this sad, pleading expression. It took me a second to snap back to reality, to get past the shock. "What are you doing here?" was the first thing that came out of my mouth, a lot colder than I'd intended. But I didn't care. She had no right to just show up like this. "Can we talk?" she said, shifting the baby in her arms. I didn't know where else to go. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. Talk about what? I was done with her games, done with the guilt trips, done with the emotional mess she'd left behind. I wasn't about to let her waltz back into my life just because things hadn't worked out the way she thought they would. She looked down at the baby, then back at me. "I thought you'd at least want to meet him," she said softly. He's part of you too, whether you like it or not." It was a low blow, and she knew it. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "No," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "He's not part of me. You made that choice when you decided to go off with someone else. That's his dad, not me." She flinched, and for a second I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered everything I'd gone through, all the nights I'd spent struggling to put myself back together. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into playing a role that wasn't mine to fill. She sighed, shifting uncomfortably. "I know I messed up, okay? I've been dealing with that every single day, but he doesn't have anyone else." Her voice cracked a little, and she looked at me, eyes full of this desperation that honestly made me feel a little sick. "Where's his dad?" I asked bluntly. I wanted to hear her say it, to admit that whatever she thought she had with this guy clearly hadn't worked out. She hesitated, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. He left," she mumbled, barely audible. "He didn't want anything to do with us." There it was, the big truth. She'd thought she could play both sides, use me as the fallback option if her little mistake didn't work out. And now that she was left holding the pieces, she wanted me to pick them up. I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to keep it together. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You cheated on me, had a baby with this guy, and now that he's out of the picture, you want me to step in and be the dad? Just because you're alone?" Her face fell, and she looked down at the baby again, as if hoping he'd somehow soften me up. "I'm not saying it like that," she whispered, "but he deserves a family, a real family, and I thought maybe we could start over for his sake." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. She actually thought she could just show up, say a few lines about starting over, and I'd just forget everything. It was like she didn't even realize how much damage she'd done. "I don't think you get it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've moved on. I spent months putting myself back together after what you did. I'm not the same guy I was back then, and I'm definitely not interested in playing happy family with someone who destroyed my trust." "But it's different now," she insisted, her voice breaking a bit. "We could be different. I know you'd be a great dad. You always talked about wanting kids, a family." "Yeah," I interrupted, "with someone who actually respected me. Someone who didn't cheat and lie and then show up months later, expecting me to just forget all of it because they need help." I took a step back, opening the door wider. "I think it's time for you to leave." She looked stunned, like she genuinely hadn't expected me to say no. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what else to do. I'm alone." "That's not my problem," I replied firmly. "You made your choice. You chose him over me, and now you're dealing with the consequences. I'm not here to clean up your mess." For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, her eyes filling with tears. I could see the pain, the regret, maybe even a bit of guilt. But I didn't let it sway me. I couldn't. I'd finally found some peace, and I wasn't about to let her rip it all apart again. "I thought you'd be different," she whispered. "I thought you'd understand." I shook my head. I did understand once, but I'm done being the backup plan. I'm done with the guilt trips, the manipulations. This is your life now, not mine. I'm not going to raise another man's child just because you messed up. She didn't say anything else after that, just held the baby a little tighter and nodded, a defeated look in her eyes. For a second, I felt a little pang of sympathy. I mean, yeah, she looked miserable, and I could see that she was hurting. But that didn't change anything. I wasn't about to give up my own happiness to fix her mistakes. Without another word, she turned and walked away slowly, like she was in a daze. I closed the door and just stood there, staring at it, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of me felt bad for the kid. I mean, none of this was his fault. But I couldn't let myself get dragged into a life that wasn't mine, a responsibility that wasn't mine to bear. I took a deep breath, leaning against the door, trying to calm down. It was over. Really over. Whatever tiny bit of closure I still needed, that moment gave it to me. I knew now that I'd made the right choice by letting her go. I'd given myself a second chance, a clean break, and I wasn't going to mess it up by getting pulled back into her drama. She was out of my life for good, and I was finally free to live mine. And for the first time, I felt okay with that. Hey, with